All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I hope everyone is doing well. My name's Allie Cantrell, and I'm the Director of Education Outreach with Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Today, we're going to go over the processing with Dr. Jason Sawyer with Auburn University. Him, myself, Ellie Watson, and Alex Teague have organized this program. Basically, we're going to go over the live animal processing today. Throughout this session, please keep your microphones muted to prepare your live, to keep your microphones muted and type any questions that you may have into the chat box. I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in, and if I feel like it's important to address the question in the moment, then I will pause the speaker to ask. If not, we will save the question for the last 15 minutes of the session. You are also always welcome to email or call any one of us after the session should you have any questions afterwards. Kicking off the webinar series will be Jason Sawyer, who is an associate professor of meat science in the Department of Animal Science at Auburn University. He arrives at Auburn from Texas, where he was previously an associate professor at Tarleton State University. In Texas, he guided the meat laboratory operations, meat judging team, and instructed animal science students on meat science and processing techniques. Prior to joining the academy, Dr. Sawyer was a senior food technologist at Tyson Foods Incorporated, and he earned his master's in animal science with meat science emphasis from Oklahoma State University and a Ph.D. in animal science with meat science emphasis from the University of Arkansas. So definitely give a good warm welcome to Dr. Sawyer and we're excited to have him in this session today.
Thank you, Allie. So I apologize for all the technical difficulties that we all experienced here to start off, but I think we're going to have a great discussion today about some of the new interest that is captivating our attention in the animal agriculture industry, particularly the beef industry, or even just the meat consumption industry. So I'm excited to be a part of this webinar series with Alabama Cattlemen's Alex Teague and Ellie Watson as well. And I look forward to Friday wrapping this up with you guys so you guys have a better idea of what it takes to get your finished product to the consumer during some of maybe the most challenging times that we've probably seen in production agriculture in the last 20 or 30 years. So with that, we'll kind of get started, and I'm really excited today to share with you guys the focus of the discussion because I have a huge passion for it. It's the meat industry, and it's ultimately what we're producing products for. From birth to consumption in that capacity. And everybody in this arena plays a very vital role to getting the product that we do consume. As you know, a lot of the research that exists out there today supports that we are heavily influenced by meat consumption, not only in the United States, but across the globe. So with our focus today, I hope that maybe we provide a few more answers to your identification of a processor, understand some of the differences that exist between the aging parameters that maybe some of your products might experience during this new or creative method that you might be embarking on or currently focused on in your production practices. And then also some of what are the traditional yields that I could expect if I'm just jumping into this arena with a new idea to enhance my profitability or my production of revenue from my agriculture enterprises. So I'm very passionate about the meat cutting and the meat processing arena. It is an art. You know, we are accustomed at times to seeing less artistic items in the retail market today. Some of these tend to be that we would see from an artistic interpretation tend to be at a more localized setting for retail consumers. In the mainstream retail setting, we're accustomed to something that is more convenient, easier to cook, less variation from package to package. But I want to share that the meat processing industry is very artistic, and it but it can also come with a large cost to it. And like a lot of other production agriculture, we're seeing a big need for the interest and the continual movement of making the meat industry or the processing arena very important. If we look at the average age of our production farmers today, we're going to see those probably pushing around 58 to 59 years of age. And we probably likely see the meat processors approaching the same platform. A younger generation is slow to jump into this adventure of production agriculture because they've come accustomed to walking through the grocery store aisles and being able to pick up and put everything into their grocery cart. So we need more people with a passion for producing local or more regional cuts of meat, or providing them with an opportunity to source those items. And then hopefully that today, that even though there is some artistic interpretation of meat cuttery, there is some differences between the processor and a butcher. Maybe a butcher is your local butcher that can do some Frenching to some of the cuts of meat that you like, tie it up, make some charcuterie, and adding value in some value-added products. Whereas your processor might be your butcher or your processor entity that is going to take your live animal and convert it into packaged products that you might sell to a variety of customers. So there are a few differences that do exist within this arena, but we need more passion. We need more people who are interested in moving into this focus. So maybe you're new into this adventure of wanting to sell custom meats. Maybe you've been doing it for quite a long time already on a smaller scale basis, and you're wanting to increase the opportunity of selling more custom cuts of meat to your regional clientele. Hopefully, through the end of this, we'll be able for you to identify or provide some answers to some of the questions that you might have for identifying a processor, and some of the initial questions that individuals might be reluctant to ask on the front side before jumping into it, or the forms of inspection that their processor of selection might have. We all care about the costs that go into the products that we're trying to produce. And then even the distance, as we're seeing fewer and fewer of these processing small to very small facilities available throughout the nation within a region, our distance to travel is going to increase. And are we willing to accept the added costs of traveling to a particular facility for these kind of processing adventures? And then, listing their available dates for processing. One thing that we can probably all attest to that have logged into this webinar today and on Monday is that when we stepped into the pandemic in March and it continued to progress longer and longer into the months of April and May, we became more interested in finding ability to market beef products and custom products to consumers, because of fear for stores and the lack of volume that might have become apparent in some of the retail outlets. What we're seeing is because of the smaller number of opportunities for processing available, we're seeing a longer wait period for some of these. And I'll go into a little bit further detail later about why we're seeing some of those available dates. One of my experiences in guiding an operation similar to custom processing is we would inevitably get a phone call on a Monday and a person would want an animal processed on a Friday. And because of the lack of total numbers of processing facilities that we see across the nation, many of these institutions are just booking up at a much faster rate. And with this recent interest of custom processing and meat processing, we're seeing those book up a lot longer in advance now. Another question that you might ask your processor or become familiar with yourself is how familiar and comfortable are they with cutting unique cuts that you might see on a particular handout or a pamphlet that a commodity organization provides. Or maybe you're an avid fan of the Food Network channel or the cooking channel, and a celebrity chef is using something that is unique to you. Familiarity with cutting some of these is not across all processing facilities. They are becoming, some of these are more unique. Some of them are dictated based upon the time in which those folks have to make that processing work. But a few items that I've pictured here that you can see. I've added the culotte, which tends to be the cap muscle of the sirloin. This has traditionally been served in a Brazilian steakhouse, and it is quite flavorful. It's becoming more popular as we see it, and people become more familiar with it across the nation. It's a very moderately tender cut, typically loaded with considerable amounts of marbling, and actually can be a convenient alternative to a cut like the brisket. It takes far less time to cook. You have less yield loss that occurs during the cooking process, and it still gives you the same kind of texture and bite when you get finished cooking it that a brisket might give. Another opportunity is a tri-tip. We saw a huge push of the tri-tip that occurred across the western section of the United States, in California, as we see folks come from other regional and global travels. So this cut becomes more popular in other parts of the globe. But again, another cut that is oftentimes underutilized, but makes a great alternative for something that gives you similar texture and appeal than a brisket, and takes far less cooking time. In my experiences personally, cooking the tri-tip and the culotte, I would prefer spending about 3 to 4 hours at max cooking those versus 8 to 10 hours or longer cooking a brisket for a weekend event. Some of the other cuts that become more popular are the Flatiron. Again, another steak option. You have customers that are probably wanting mostly steaks, and the Flatiron becomes one of those that becomes familiar. They go to a restaurant, Chili's or Outback or Logan Steakhouse, and they see a Flatiron on the menu. When you sell them a side of beef or a box of beef, they would like to have some Flatiron steaks. A very difficult cut to produce because of the nature in which it lies in the animal carcass. And so some processors might not be as comfortable in producing these. They might not feel comfortable in how they look when they're packaged. They can get you the muscle, they can cut it up, but at the end, in their confidence level might not be as high as your expectations are in offering a unique cut like this. And some of the other more notable cuts that we're seeing popularity are the bone-in tomahawks or the bone-in strip steaks. Again, packaging becomes an issue. You see that we probably have 8 to 12 inches of bone that are going to be exposed on this cut. And as you're selling it to your customers, think about the package that this has to be presented to you as a customer of custom processing. Oftentimes, small to very small processing facilities don't contain the necessary packaging that fit this type of unique cut without some, expensive equipment added. So think about those options as you are discussing with your processor what availability they have and how familiar they are. When identifying some of those processing facilities, you might ask the question to those processors, what form of inspection do you operate under? And there are different forms in which we can sell and utilize products, meat products in the United States today. Most, if not all, will follow the Code of Food Regulations, and they will have some form of hazard analysis, critical control points, basically recipes that guide us processors in the methods of producing products for the consumer in a safe and wholesome manner. And so that temperature is monitored of the product during the production practices. Cleanliness of the facility is monitored prior to each production day. Cleanliness of the employees, hygiene of the employees, cleanliness of the packaging materials, all follow into some of the Code of Food Regulations that guide us in producing products. If you're looking to move your product across state lines in some form or fashion, you'll want to identify a federally inspected plant. From a small to very small processing facilities, these tend to be very few options available across the nation. While they enable us to market our products across state boundaries and transport them, sometimes the limiting factor tends to be the inspection service that can be provided in that region, whether it's a constant or a floating inspector that could be present. Some of the other options that exist today are a state inspected facility, like we might see in the state of Alabama. Those products produced in that setting tend to follow and can only be sold within the boundaries of the state, and are typically inspected by state inspectors during that process and identified with an mark of inspection. And then we get down to the last option, custom exempt, where inspection typically doesn't occur on the animal processing side of things. There could be, in some instances, random site visits to the facility for inspection of documentation, the cleanliness of the facility, the records that they might be keeping. But ultimately, this product is going to be stamped and identified in a not for sale kind of packaging. This product tends to be product that must be sold prior to delivery to the processing facility, so that it's intended for that customer only. Right? And so it would be a similar example of a individual owning a beef animal, and they're using that beef animal to feed only their immediate household family members, and they are not going to sell that product to any other family member or an external customer in that capacity, because we're not using some form of inspection during that processing methods, and we do not have a third-party oversight. In these instances, these plants operate and utilize the same training, the same guidelines, the same care and wholesomeness of creating your product. There's just not a inspector present during the processing procedures. Some of the additional questions that oftentimes come up during custom processing and should be addressed at the beginning. Familiarity with cuts of meat that you would like, distance of how far you might have to travel. Really, it comes down to, you want to understand on the forefront what kind of packaging is available. There are a lot of different packaging forms. Some processors are more comfortable with these forms, so that they become easier to use. They're cheaper for the processing facility to utilize. However, there are some restrictions on the life of the product that are associated with them. We see here what historically started out as butcher paper, a butcher wrap product. Some enterprises still utilize this method because they deem it a faster, more efficient method, a lower cost alternative to wrapping cuts of meat. Big game processors tend to utilize this. The downside of a butcher wrapped paper product is the duration in which you can keep it stored within your freezer. This product is really only intended to last about 6 months. Plus or minus a few weeks, because it is exposed to the atmosphere within your freezer, and it's not preventing any ice crystal formation of the product. So if you have customers buying larger quantities, 2, 3, 400 pounds of packaged product, the ideal setting is probably not a butcher wrapped product. Moving into what we don't see a lot in the retail setting is a vacuum packaged product. This product is going to protect the duration of your product for oftentimes up to a year, where you would not notice no distinguishable flavor influence because it's been stored as long as the package integrity has been maintained while you're keeping that product. So those are some of the options that exist. Your ground beef product could be put into a tube of this nature. Again, something that is less likely to enhance your storage period of your ground products. But when we're dealing with ground products, we tend to have a seasoned product that we're using most of that for. So we don't notice as much sensory or taste differences. Some of the factors that your processor might influence packaging method on are your bone-in versus boneless cuts and the charges that are associated with those. It's an industry today that there is a high demand for processing. And so price for having processing done is in the hands of the processor per se, because demand is so high. They are a hot commodity right now. So there are differences that we will see based upon bone-in versus boneless cuts in the industry. And then lastly is what additional charges might that processor bring to the table as you think about what you want to have processed into your product. And this is a process of determination that you can begin when you have identified the animal that you want to begin feeding for that process, and then have identified that processor. What additional charges do they have at their disposal? Are they going to charge for aging that process? Many times we'll see that if you take a cut of meat and you have to dice it up into 2 by 2 inch cube for stew or kebab meat, they're going to say it takes more time and will add on additional processing fees. Putting it into a patty form is something else that tends to take more time by the processor and require additional charges. And then even getting down in here to some of the value-added products such as turkey, snack stick. It's going to take away from the total product that you can sell if you're selling on a fixed price, but it's also going to add cost from the processor side that they will charge you as a customer of the processing because it takes more time, there's more yield loss in making some of the roast, tying, netting, and value-added products that you might see. So I just, it's easy to find some of these pricings in searching the internet today across the nation. And these are not local. Most of these are from as far away as California and Texas to Kansas. And so these are just some averages and processing pricing that I have experienced and found today in this industry because processing is such a high demand right now. And again, the volume of processors available is extremely low. So many times you'll see a slaughter fee. This is just to get the animal from an alive standpoint to hanging carcass on the rail that will range anywhere from $5 to $75 per animal. And, you know, ideally, after that, it starts to break down into individual preferences of that particular processor. And we can see that the price of processing can get expensive very quick based upon what specific unique orders you want to create for your particular customers. So my recommendations in selecting a processor and identifying that form of processing facility that you might want to use, federal or state, you know, also bears with it the type of packaging material and the fees that are going to be associated with producing that product for your customer. Oftentimes, I recommend the simpler that you can keep your orders, the happier your processor will be and the least cost that will be incurred. When you start to add additional things like adding 50 pounds of patties, you might see another dollar per pound added fee for making hamburger patties. It's still your meat, it's in your form, but it takes their workers more time than just simply cutting it to make these patties for you. The same with cutting stew meat or turning cuts into boneless cuts. As we talked previously, the age of the custom processing facility workers and owners tends to be increasing over time, similar to production agriculture. Those methods that they potentially utilize are some of the historically older methods of cutting, mostly bone-in cuts, because it takes less time and oftentimes a little less effort to run most of the cuts on a bandsaw and produce a lot more volume per day of custom beef. Some of the other things think about as a person interested in selling your beef is, you know, what do I want to, how long do I want to age these carcasses? And what is that going to cost? Because most processors, if they're not, they will start charging for aging because they're limited on space. And their space in their processing facilities is some of the greatest expense that they have. And so limitations on how long they can hang. I have experienced customers that have hung a carcass for up to 35 days before they want you to begin cutting that product. Some instances, after 7 days, it's a rolling dollar per day charge. So it becomes very expensive if you're willing to make that commitment. Your intent then on the backside is to sell your product to maximize that investment into the aging and the flavor development that you might occur during your product. Additional charges, some places, if you want a custom label, maybe you have a logo from your farm. Maybe it's a logo that you've created so that you become unique. This takes time. It's not a simple procedure. In most instances, the labels then have to be submitted for review and approval by either the state organization that is overseeing the inspection process or by USDA. It's not usually a plug and play, here's my picture, throw it on a label. In that case, so you might see an additional cost in some instances of up to $100 to $150. More often than not, if you're looking to sell in some of the farmers market options, you want to individually priced. Some processors might not have the ability to print you a price point label in that capacity. If they do, again, it takes more time. It takes an additional label. It takes time to set that product on that scale and weigh it and put it into a box. And so a lot of these costs that typically seen in the processing arena tend to be associated with the time in which it takes to create the order. Inevitably, you might have a time in which you have half of a beef sold, and then the other half is sold to two other individuals that you need to quarter. If you want to split evenly, your processor is taking on that responsibility to split it for you in those instances. Maybe you're willing to do the split at your house. And so you could save $40 to $20 per carcass. Anytime that you look at wanting to have quality and yield grading done, some of these processors are going to charge you for that process. So it can get very expensive very quickly, depending upon the processor, depending upon the region in which you're working, and the demand that that processor is typically seeing. Scheduling processing date is probably one of the right now the most contentious topics that we will see and experience as an individual who might be selling custom processed meats to regional clients. Because it's not that they don't want your business, it's that they're a business that is limited on a multitude of things. They're limited on their hours of processing. They're not in the industry like the corporations that are running up to 16 hours a day, processing hundreds to millions of pounds of meat proteins every single day. They might be limited to 5 to 20, no more than 20 employees. Another big limitation is once they get your product boxed and put into the freezer, they might be even limited on square footage that they have available for storing your product. And it comes down to time and the availability of space. And it inevitably, you take your animal to the processor, you drop it off, you instruct them 14 days. During that 14-day window, you have a vacation to the beach for 7 days. They call you at the end of the 14 days and say that it's done and you have 5 days to pick it up, but you can't get home. Those tend to be some of the frustrations that both the processor and the customer tend to face as big hurdles. Another question that you might ask on the forefront before you jump into this venture is to say, do you process game at any point during the calendar year? Because in those instances, those facilities will likely shut down to domesticated animals to accommodate their game processors to some extent. In my experience in coming from Texas, processors would shut down from about the middle of November until the first 2 weeks of February for all domesticated animals. And it was purely a game processing enterprise that they might see up to 2,000 exotic game animals during that window. So when they shut down for those periods of time, it takes away weeks of production for domesticated animals like beef and pork and lamb and goat that they cannot then make up on the backside. So those questions are very important as you start to think about this venture of getting into or enhancing your custom processing arena. And then most importantly, popularity. We all have some kind of technology. We all have a vehicle that we love. We all have a clothing line that we prefer to use. The same holds true for the processing arena. Popularity it will drive the availability of these processors moving forward from this point until the foreseeable future. It's inevitable that you will see people jump from one processor to the next processor based upon availability or popularity over time. Currently, in just searching and discussing with friends throughout the nation, we're definitely seeing some extended wait times for some of these processing availabilities. And I think Alex mentioned that some of the earliest ones or the longest ones that he heard of in our Monday webinar was August of 2021. But I would wholeheartedly believe most, if not everything, probably in this region is booked through the fall. And we're really starting to dig deep into the January, February, March, and April calendar period at this time because of the popularity of generating custom products like we're seeing today. And so making that connection, making that relationship, building that network with those processors in your region is something that takes time and effort, and but will be beneficial to you. In my previous institution, inevitably, I had folks that would book a calendar year out because they knew every March they would have 1 to 5 animals ready for processing. And that in itself lends it with some difficulty because you're counting on 5 as a processor, they only bring 1. And so that lends to some difficulty as well in scheduling that process. But inevitably, you always have people that are willing to make that commitment on a year in advance network. I always stress in working with my enthusiasts in the meat processing arena, especially on the local and regional side, is patience and communication, because they're working as fast as they can get product cut, and you're trying to get it sold as quickly as it can get packaged. And so it's a difficult process. We see a lot of these flyers all over, and maybe your local butcher has one hanging in their hallway in their storefront in their office. You see it at the grocery store. You've seen it in a magazine or a pamphlet, and you have an interest to say, well, what can I do that I don't have to add so much ground beef? You know, if we think about our per capita consumption of beef products in the nation, we're tailoring right around 62 to 63 pounds per person. If it's like my family, we're eating ground beef at least once a week in some form or fashion. And we're eating far fewer things like bone-in roasts, chuck roast, arm roast, you know, cuts that were popular 40 and 50 years ago from an old school butcher in our markets today. And we're preferring things that are like the tri-tip and the culotte that gives me that barbecue brisket approach. I've got a pellet cooker, I throw it on there for 2 hours, and then I've made some amazing tacos for my family. So this, while it is exciting to look at times, can create more pain for you as a customer of custom processing and the processor itself, because maybe their cut doesn't look exactly like this picture looks. We can make a lot of things look great using an amazing technology and taking multiple pictures on multiple days when we start to break down these different cuts of meat. And each cut is going to look a little bit different. And so this can be overwhelming. But think about that as their comfort level in identifying some of these newer, more convenient steaks that we're seeing, such as a Vegas steak, the Flatiron, maybe the mock tender, or even I've had individuals ask for Asian style barbecue ribs. The butcher that you utilize or the processor might not have cut those before in that capacity. When you say cross-cut ribs or country style ribs or short ribs, they're going to say, yep, I know how to cut a short rib. And that's exactly what I would say as well. And then when the customer gets their product, you find out, no, it's not exactly like the picture that they found on the web, or they saw Guy Fieri cooking on diners, drive-ins, and dives at some time. So communication and patience and working with both parties tends to make for a better finished product as we get into this arena. We talk a little bit about meat aging, and you have to understand there's going to be a cost associated with it. If we think about this is just maybe one processor's storage facility for processed animals, it's holding 30 or 40 pork carcasses at this time. It seems like it's a lot of space. This is very large for potential custom processing facility, because when they build these plants, they're talking dollars per square foot, just like a home. And these processing facilities can get extremely expensive very quickly based upon the amount of square footage that they put in, especially for space that they're just storing products in, and it's not working per se. So we might see costs associated with adding this process. Aging can improve the product quality that your consumer will get from your product. It will enhance some of the sensory taste, the tenderness of that product. It occurs naturally over time, and in refrigerated conditions by breaking down some of these muscle proteins, utilizing the enzymes that exist within the meat. And that occurs over time from as few as 2 days to as much as 120 days. And so communicating your desires for the product that you are putting into the marketplace on how long you would want that aged is very important, because you want to know what costs are associated with that product and how you need to price your finished product to your consumers. And they want to know so that they can book and schedule their processing additional customers in accordance with how long they have product hanging. Because if you put up 15 beef carcasses along this wall over here on the other side of the pork carcasses, and they are aging 35 days, that rail is locked down for 35 days, and it limits the other 4 hanging areas that the processor can utilize in producing that product. So it becomes a backlog situation that builds with anxiety and frustration over time when creating these aging parameters. Some of the things that maybe is unique and you found, and what we hope to discuss today in this webinar was related to dry aging. And I found a great resource in the Journal of Animal Science. I've provided it here to you. Ideally, we're really talking about items that are going to be on a per piece basis. At times you'll see a carcass, but adding that additional aging fee from a processor perspective and tying up that time might not pay out to you as the customer due to the cost that's associated. But we're seeing it in the beef industry, especially aging products up to 240 days. It's really going to be on a per consumer preference for the flavor of the product and associated with the cost. Here's some of the pictures that are associated in that resource that maybe you can dive into. And this is what typically happens. You go to a high-end steakhouse in a major metropolitan area. They have a room set up where they're dry aging several subprimals, ribs, short loins of product, and they're enhancing the flavor of that product. Maybe you've been into a specialty grocery store that has a cabinet and they're aging products for customers. It's going to improve some tenderness, about 17 to 20%, but you're going to see a decline in cutting yields from that product. And so in essence, your price point should increase considerably for that product. If we talk about wet aging, we're going to talk about some of the product that you might see in the grocery store in a vacuum package, cryovac bag format. Again, it's going to occur in a refrigerated temperature. Humidity is not a requirement. We've seen products in the industry aged, especially in some purveyor applications, up to 90 days. Maybe you've gone to a Costco, a Sam's Club. You might see a bulk bin of those products full of briskets, tenderloins, rib rolls, strip loins. You can buy those, take them home, whole, put them in your refrigerator based upon the date that might be stamped on the package label, and age them a little bit longer. What's becoming more popular is dry aging at home, just like beer manufacturing and wine manufacturing and distillery has become more and more popular over time. Some of the biggest questions that as a processor might get is how much meat are you going to get me? What am I going to be able to sell? Well, that is going to vary considerably. Typically in the industry, we see about 60 to 65% on a dressing percentage basis. That's going to remove all the hide, the head, the feet, the viscera, and the blood. You're going to see some considerable differences, whether you're finishing those out on grain or whether you've thrown some grass in there. And inevitably, the grass-fed ones, think about the rate at which that grass gets digested and passed through the animal's body. In processing arena, I've seen cattle come through dressing in the 55 to 58%. Because they're full of grass and they've been grazing grass for the duration of their finishing period. So that is going to considerably impact the amount of product that you might see coming off of that. In addition to some of the mud, the hide, and other things that we typically associate. And doing some quick math, here's how you can get those figures, just taking your carcass weight, divided by your live weight that you might take, multiply by 100, and then you get your percentage, right? Some of the things that I've seen in the industry and I've collected over time in my experiences is what am I going to see from fat to bone amount? And this is what's really cool to me is that if the blue line is your bone and your orange line is your fat, that over time you're going to see from a yield grade 1 to a yield grade 5, the amount of fat typically increase. You're also going to see some of the bone increase because those animals tend to be a little bit older in experiences. And so their bones tend to be a little bit denser. Your cutability from your processing side of things can vary. So dressing percent doesn't tell you how much meat you're going to get in a box. Typically, yield grade will help in determining that variation that you will see from your cutting side of things. But the easiest method that I've used is by calculating what the carcass weight and calculating a 48 to 55% range off of the carcass weight is standard, because in smaller processing facilities, trimming tends to be a little more difficult because specialty equipment isn't available to utilize for some of these options. If we're thinking about how you're thinking about aging that product specifically over time, this is how much water your product is going to lose if you consider hanging that product for up to 35 days. Your meat product that is hanging is about 60 to 80% water. And so the longer that you hang that product, the more evaporation that you have in place and the more loss that you're going to have, meaning less product for you to be sold to the consumer. All right. And so on average, what I've seen based upon duration of hanging, carcass weight, fat and bone, bone in versus boneless, cutting and trimming expertise, you'll typically see anywhere from 350 to 450 pounds, depending upon the product that you're taking to the processor and the live weight. If you take an 800-pound live weight animal, you're not going to see 300 pounds of packaged product, regardless if it's yield grade 1 or 2. All right. And so the typical range you can utilize carcass weight of the animal and figure 52 to 58% of the product that is hanging is going to end up in your boxes that you sell. Some of the things that you could focus on during that process are how are you selling your products and what is going to influence that product that you're selling in that box. A whole carcass. You know, one of the coolest things that I'm seeing and that I've seen across the industry is the vending machine. and the use of vending machines. Maybe if you're in a metropolitan area or a different area in which you could stock this vending machine, it is refrigerated. It can be frozen product. It can be an outlet that you could utilize in some capacity to sell that. Maybe you're utilizing direct sales versus farmers markets or a roadside market. The social media aspect is your friend in selling this product. If you get into some of these variety specialty meats, think about the cost associated with it. It's going to take your processor more time. They're going to charge you more for your product. Are you willing to push that cost onto your consumer when it comes time to selling your product? One thing that I think everyone forgets to consider when they're selling custom products is things like bone and fats. Create a relationship with a restaurant, a local restaurant, restaurants that make beef broth, bone broth, soup broth, maybe that want to be non-traditional and cooking in animal fats to some extent. There are countless pounds of product that go thrown into a barrel and sent to rendering by your processor that you could be selling in some capacity, because we're in an age where everybody, for the most part, is watching a cooking show or a YouTube channel, and they're learning how to cook things. They're wanting to make their own bone broth, beef broth. They're wanting to render some fat down to make their own tallow in that capacity. So think about how you can do that. Make it easier for your processor. Sell it in bulk to your customer. Put it in a 5 to 10 pound box. Make it simple, because the more difficult that you make it, the more they're just going to charge you to make it happen. They'll be happy in most instances to sell it or to process it up in a bulk box for you as a customer of custom processing than to put it into a barrel and pay for a rendering company to come haul it away. Other things that I always consider and have people think about is, what, most importantly, when you start this venture, what form of inspection do I want to fall under with my products? Do I want to be able to sell it to my friends in North Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, Arkansas, or do I just want to sell regionally? Call that processor as early as possible. I oftentimes recommend, when you find that animal and you know you're going to put it in the dry lot, give them a call on the day that it goes into your dry lot setting. All right. Or maybe you're just going to grass feed it and let it go to a 1,200 pound, and you determine at the time of weaning. Do it then, and identify. Give that person plenty of time to help you in that capacity. Identify, do these specialty cuts give you any additional edge in marketing your product? Does it enhance your product to make it age a little bit longer? And then what processing costs can you truly eliminate to streamline your process, to maximize your return, and to make your relationship with your processor that much more effective and comfortable? All right. I know we're kind of closing in on time today, but I want to thank everybody for sponsoring this opportunity, and my contact information that's listed here. I want you to hopefully tune in on Friday, same time, same location, but you're going to learn about pricing from Ellie Watson and Alex T, and learn how can you get that return on your investment and the time and effort it takes for you to put into processing that product. So I think at this time, if there are any questions, we'll field a few of those. And if not, thank you for taking the time to log in and view.
All right, so we have a few questions on here. If y'all have any other questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll read them out to Jason. But one interesting question that I got, Jason, was they want you to address the idea of building a small processing building on their farm. They're like with a cooler, processing room, cold storage. They're a construction family, and they have a family member that is very experienced butcher that will be willing to cut meat on a part-time basis. Both of these variables make it feasible for them to consider this option. Like most, they are looking to be a boutique supplier of beef, which means they would only be processing about 10 to 15 per year. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jason, or how, what information that they can consider?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think do it. I think it's a great opportunity. And I think that, getting in touch with myself and Alex and Barney Wilburn, we can help answer and direct them in that process for guiding it. The biggest decision before you start the construction is decide, do you want to be an inspected facility that is processing animals to be sold? Or are you utilizing inspected product that arrives to your location and then you're reselling it under an exemption? Both can happen, just some greater details to answering that question. But I think that's an awesome opportunity. And I think that we as customers and consumers of meat products, I definitely am willing to pay more for some of these boutique type options. So reach out to us and we can definitely guide you with answering some more of those questions. But I think it's a very doable process.
Awesome. And from the same person, they also see if they want to know if you see any integrity issues with processors. For example, one story that he heard recently was that a farmer went to pick up his processed beef and the cow that he dropped off was still alive in the pen.
Um, that's a slippery slope to go down. I think that goes back to developing that relationship with the processor, and to identify what they actually, what their intent of their business is as a processor. Are they selling some cuts of meat in the front of their shop as well? I've seen and heard of similar rumors occurring with nothing substantiated, but it's one in which build that relationship with the processor and get to know them. In most instances, they're there to make the needs of what you as a customer want. And I think that's where you have to do your research. You don't go out and buy a car or a new TV without doing a little bit of research on that, at least not in today's arena. And so I think you have to do your due diligence and research on identifying that relationship with the processor.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. And then I have a question. This person kind of came on late to the webinar. They want to know, what is the percentage of live or dressed weight that a customer can expect in a finished product?
Or dressed weight. So the dressed weight, you're probably going to see about 60 to 65% dressed weight. In a finished packaged product, you're going to see about 52 to 58% of that dressed weight in a packaged product. So that's going to take into account how long you hang that carcass and any cooler shrink that occurs, any product that gets trimmed off or doesn't make it into the package. There is some loss. Bone in versus boneless. There are hundreds of pounds of bones and fat that just get thrown into inedible waste that we as producers of agriculture products don't oftentimes remember when we go through that processing process.
And then I had one more question that I can address myself. There was someone that asked if there's a list of inspected processors in the Southeast. That's a project I've been working on in-house to get a list of processors in the state of Alabama. I can email, I think it's Randy M. that asked that question. I can email you a list of those processors, and if anybody else needs processors in their general area, just email me, ask me if I know. Hopefully we will have a list published on our website of all these processing plants, so that way y'all can just log in to our website and find them. I'm waiting to hear back on some of them, whether or not they want to be listed on there, because as we've kind of said, sometimes they have all they can do throughout the year, so they don't necessarily want to be advertised, if that makes sense. But hopefully we'll have that published on our website. And something else I wanted to bring up while I'm here is we are putting a directory together on our website for people that produce freezer beef. So if you are a producer that's doing that currently, we want you to submit your information. It's the exact same link that you use to register for this webinar. You can go down there and fill out the form of whether you do wholes, halves, quarters, or if you go to a custom processing plant or federal or state. And you can just fill out that information and we will put you in our directory to be uploaded to our website for people to contact you if they're looking for freezer beef. My email is Cantrell, Cantrell, @bamabeef.org. And I will, as soon as this webinar is finished recording and we uploaded it to our website, I will send a link to everybody of where it is. Also, another question for you, Jason, is, and for Alex and Ellie as well, would y'all be willing to have your slides put up on our website? I had one person ask if they could have it in a PDF format for them to look through. I know a lot of people are more visual learners than, say, listening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Allie, this is Alex. I'm on here with Barney. I'll be glad to send you my slides from Monday. We'll
Perfect.
put them up as like a PDF format type deal or something that folks can slide through. That wouldn't be a problem.
Awesome. And Ellie said yes as well. So we will work on that if that's all right with you, Jason.
Yes, I will send them to you here shortly.
Perfect. Okay. If anyone else doesn't have any questions, I appreciate y'all logging in today. It was a great webinar. And again, I will send you all this information and keep y'all updated on the directory as well as the processing plant list. And just call or email me if y'all have any questions, and as well as Alex, Jason, and Ellie as well. All right.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you, Jason. All right. If that's it, we'll log off. Thank you, guys.